The Mont Blanc pen felt heavy in my hand as I signed the resignation letter. Funny how 30 years on the bench could end with a single stroke of ink. The leather chair creaked beneath me, its musty scent mixing with the sharp tang of my own sweat. Chairman Aldridge didn't even look me in the eye when he slid the paper across the desk. "For your own good, Nathaniel," he'd said, like he was doing me a favor. I walked home through the rain that night, my trench coat soaked through. Elizabeth was waiting at the door with a towel and that tight smile she'd been wearing ever since the anonymous complaint surfaced. "It'll be all right," she murmured, patting my shoulder like I was some fragile thing. Her jasmine perfume clung to the air between us, the same scent she'd worn on our anniversary, at our son's wedding. Only now I noticed she'd been wearing it every day for weeks. The house felt different after that. The tick of the grandfather clock in the hall grew louder. Elizabeth started taking her phone calls in the garden, even when it was freezing out. I told myself it was nothing. Stress, paranoia, the bitter taste of forced retirement creeping up on me. Then, last Tuesday, while searching for stamps in her desk, I found the envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, slightly yellowed at the edges. The moment I saw Boyle's handwriting, my stomach dropped. "You made your choice, Liz," it read. Dated 3 months before he was appointed to the Senate Judiciary Committee. That night, I watched her pour wine with steady hands, the crystal decanter catching the firelight. "Ancient history," she said when I asked, but her fingers trembled just slightly as she lifted the glass to her lips. I kissed her forehead like I believed her, waited until her breathing grew slow and even in the darkness beside me. At 3:17 a.m., I stood over our bed, the letter crumpled in my fist. The streetlight through the curtains painted stripes across Elizabeth's sleeping face, the same face I'd woken up to for 34 years. For one wild moment, I considered shaking her awake, demanding the truth. Instead, I pressed my palm into the mattress beside her head, close enough to feel the warmth of her breath. She didn't stir. Downstairs, I poured 2 fingers of bourbon and called Miriam. The phone rang 4 times before she answered, her voice rough with sleep. "Tell me I'm imagining things," I whispered into the receiver. The silence stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Then she sighed, and I heard the click of a lighter through the phone. "Nathaniel," she said, exhaling smoke, "you've never imagined a damn thing in your life." The grandfather clock struck 4. Somewhere above me, the floorboards creaked as Elizabeth turned in our bed. I stared at the amber liquid in my glass, watching the light refract through it. The truth was taking shape in the shadows, ugly and inevitable. I just didn't know yet how deep the betrayal went. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. I sat in Miriam's cramped office above her brother's law firm, the smell of wet wool and stale coffee clinging to the air. She slid a manila folder across the desk, her chipped red nail polish tapping against the label, JCR Case 4472-AL. "They used the same template on me," she said. "Vague allegations, no specifics, just enough smoke to make people assume fire." I flipped through the pages, photocopied emails, calendar entries with names redacted. Then I saw it, a memo from Boyle's office requesting judicial assignments for priority realignment, dated 2 weeks before my complaint surfaced. My finger trembled against the paper. This isn't coincidence. Miriam lit another cigarette. "Of course it's not. But Nate," she exhaled slowly, "you're not just up against Boyle. This goes deeper." That night, I pretended to sleep when Elizabeth slipped out of bed at 1 a.m. The hardwood floor creaked under her bare feet as she padded downstairs. I counted to 30 before following, stopping at the landing where I could see her hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, the blue light casting shadows under her eyes. She was crying, not the delicate tears she'd shed at our daughter's wedding, but ugly, silent sobs that shook her shoulders. I almost went to her. Almost.
Then her phone buzzed. She swiped at her face with one hand, picked up with the other. "I told you not to call this late," she whispered. A pause. "No, he doesn't know, and he won't." Her voice turned sharp. "You got what you wanted, Harrison. Now leave us alone." The refrigerator hummed to life, drowning out whatever Boyle said in response. I backed away silently, my slippers catching on the loose stair tread, the one I'd been meaning to fix for months. Elizabeth didn't hear. She never heard me anymore. The next morning, I drove to the courthouse to clear out my chambers. Julia, my former clerk, met me with 2 coffees and eyes red from crying. "They reassigned me to Judge Whitmore," she said, handing me a flash drive. "But I made copies of everything first." In the elevator, I plugged the drive into my phone. Scrolling through the files, one name kept appearing in case reassignments. Senate H. Boyle, Rec. for priority review. Cases I'd presided over for years quietly shifted to more favorable judges. Then I found the photo. It was buried in an old event folder, the Bar Association dinner 5 years ago. Elizabeth, in that emerald green dress she loved, laughing at something Boyle was saying. His hand rested on the small of her back, fingers splayed possessively. The timestamp, 11:47 p.m. I'd left early that night with a migraine. "Judge Kessler?" Julia's voice snapped me back. The elevator doors stood open. Down the hall, 2 junior attorneys quickly looked away, their whispers hanging in the air. The scent of lemon disinfectant from the nightly cleaning burned my nose. That's when I realized they all knew. The sideways glasses, the suddenly hushed conversations when I walked by. The legal community had been watching my humiliation play out like some sort of tragic farce. I handed Julia back the flash drive. "Tell Miriam I need to see Asher Cole." Back in my car, I sat gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. Through the rain-streaked windshield, I watched a young couple hurry down the courthouse steps, sharing an umbrella. The woman laughed as the man pulled her closer. I took out my phone and did something I'd never done in 34 years of marriage. I looked through Elizabeth's shared cloud storage. The most recent upload was 2 days before my resignation, a scanned document labeled est.planning. But when I opened it, I found a handwritten letter. H. The complaint is filed. Nate will resign. He's too proud to fight. But this ends now. No more threats, no more favors. You got your revenge. Let us go. The signature was unmistakable. E. The wipers squeaked against the windshield. Somewhere behind me, a car horn blared. I sat there reading those 6 lines over and over until the words blurred. Then I started the car. Miriam was right. This went deeper than Boyle, deeper than the affair. This was about legacy, reputation, the unspoken rules of power. And Elizabeth had been playing both sides all along. But the game wasn't over yet. Could you look someone in the eye knowing they betrayed you?
The house smelled of lemon polish and burnt coffee when I returned. Elizabeth stood at the kitchen island, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug, her shoulders tense beneath her silk robe. She didn't turn when I entered, just stared out the window where rain streaked the glass like tears. I set my briefcase down with deliberate care, the click of the latch unnaturally loud in the quiet. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice steady. She finally turned, her face carefully blank except for the slight tremor in her lower lip. That tiny crack in her composure nearly undid me. 34 years, and I could still read her tells. I pulled out the printed email from my jacket pocket, the paper crinkling in my grip. "Do you remember this?" Her eyes flicked to the document, then away. The mug clattered against the marble countertop as she set it down too hard. "Where did you get that? Does it matter?" I unfolded the page, smoothing it against the island. The words stood out stark and undeniable. "The complaint is filed. Nate will resign." A car passed outside, its headlights sweeping across the ceiling. In that brief illumination, I saw the moment she realized there was no lying her way out of this. Her posture shifted, shoulders squaring like she was preparing for battle.
"I was protecting you," she said. The laugh that escaped me was harsh, unfamiliar. "Protecting me? From what exactly?" "From yourself," her voice broke. "From your stubborn pride. Harrison gave you an out, a quiet resignation with your reputation intact. If you'd fought." "If I'd fought? What? The truth might have come out?" I stepped closer, close enough to see the pulse fluttering at her throat. "Tell me, Elizabeth, when exactly did protecting me involve sharing confidential case details with Boyle? Was that before or after you slept with him?" The slap of her palm against the countertop made us both flinch. A spoon rattled in the empty mug. For a long moment, the only sound was our breathing. Hers quick and shallow, mine measured, controlled. Down the hall, the grandfather clock chimed the hour, its deep tones vibrating through the floorboards. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around herself, her fingers digging into her elbows. "It wasn't like that," she whispered. "Then tell me what it was like." I kept my voice low, calm. "I think I deserve that much." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw the woman I'd married. The sharp intelligence, the fierce loyalty, now turned against me. "You were always so sure of everything," she said, "so certain of right and wrong. But the world isn't like your courtroom, Nate. Sometimes there aren't clean answers." A car door slammed outside. Through the window, I saw Miriam approaching the house, her trench coat flapping in the wind. Elizabeth followed my gaze, her face going pale. "You brought her here?" I needed a witness. The words tasted bitter, for what comes next. Miriam's knock echoed through the house. 3 sharp raps, the same pattern she'd used since law school. Elizabeth's breath hitched. "What are you going to do?" I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the knob. For 34 years, I'd built a life on truth, on justice. Now, everything rested on one simple question. Could I destroy the woman I loved to reclaim my honor?
The Senate hearing room smelled of old wood polish and stale coffee, the same as every government building I'd ever entered. But today, the air carried something else, the electric charge of anticipation. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras trained on the empty witness chair like predators waiting to pounce. I adjusted my tie, the blue silk one Elizabeth had given me last Christmas, and caught Miriam's eye across the aisle. She gave me the slightest nod. Behind her, Asher Cole sat with a file folder in his lap, his fingers tapping out a nervous rhythm. Then the doors swung open, and Senator Boyle strode in like he owned the chamber. His custom-tailored suit couldn't hide the tension in his shoulders as he took his seat at the dais. When our eyes met, his smile didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Judge Kessler," the committee chairman began, "you've made serious allegations about judicial misconduct. Before we proceed, do you have evidence to support these claims?" I reached into my briefcase, my fingers brushing against 2 sets of documents. One contained the dry facts, emails, case records, the paper trail Miriam and Asher had helped me compile. The other held Elizabeth's letters. I chose the first set. For 47 minutes, I walked them through it all. The suspicious timing of complaints, the case reassignments, the pattern spanning 6 states. My voice never wavered, even when Boyle interrupted with smug objections. Then came his turn. "Your Honor," Boyle said, oozing false sympathy, "no one here doubts your distinguished service. But isn't it possible you're seeing conspiracies where none exist? Perhaps bitterness over your unfortunate resignation has clouded your judgment?" The room held its breath. I could feel the narrative shifting, the trap closing. Without Elizabeth's testimony, this was just a disgruntled ex-judge's rant. I looked down at my hands.
The same hands that had signed unjust warrants, dismissed valid appeals, upheld the system that now sought to silence me. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I'd been complicit too. Then the doors creaked open again. Every head turned as Elizabeth walked in, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry except her wedding band. The room erupted in whispers. Boyle's pen clattered to the table. I stood frozen as Elizabeth approached the witness chair. Our eyes met for one endless second. All the apologies and accusations and 34 years of marriage passing between us in that glance. Then she turned to face the committee, her voice clear as crystal in the stunned silence. "Mr. Chairman, my name is Elizabeth Kessler. I have testimony that will corroborate Judge Kessler's claims and implicate Senator Boyle in obstruction of justice." The gallery exploded. Camera flashes lit up like lightning. Through the chaos, I saw Boyle's face, that carefully constructed mask cracking at last. Elizabeth didn't look at him. She kept her gaze straight ahead, her hands steady as she took the oath. In that moment, I saw not the woman who'd betrayed me, but the fierce advocate I'd fallen in love with all those years ago. As she began to speak, I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the second set of documents, the letters, the proof of our personal tragedy. For a heartbeat, I considered submitting them. Then I tore them in half. The sound was louder than I expected, a sharp, final rip that cut through the murmurs. Boyle's head snapped toward me, his eyes widening as he realized what I'd destroyed. His leverage, his insurance. Elizabeth's testimony continued, her words measured and devastating. But all I could focus on was the weight lifting from my shoulders, the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a judge again. Not of her, not of Boyle, of myself. How far would you go to reclaim your dignity?
The morning sunlight streamed through the windows of my new chambers, painting warm rectangles across the freshly polished oak desk. The scent of lemon oil and new leather bindings mingled with the earthy aroma of the coffee Julia had brought, black, no sugar, just how I'd always taken it. She hovered by the door, her youthful face alight with triumph. "Senior Judge Kessler," she said, testing the title. "It has a nice ring to it." I ran my hand along the desk's smooth surface, feeling the faint grooves in the wood. This wasn't my old office. That space had been reassigned, but it was mine. The brass nameplate caught the light as I adjusted it. Hon Nathaniel Kessler, Senior Status. Down the hall, whispers still followed me, but their tone had changed. Where there had once been pity, I now saw respect. The young prosecutors stood straighter when I passed. The bailiffs nodded with something like admiration. Miriam met me for lunch at our usual diner, the same booth we'd shared for 20 years. She slid a newspaper across the chipped formica table. Boyle's resignation announcement on page 3. "They buried it," she said, tapping the photo of his strained smile, "but everyone knows." I pushed the paper aside. The eggs on my plate were exactly how I liked them. Over easy, the yolks still runny. Some things remained unchanged. Elizabeth's letter arrived that afternoon. No return address, just her familiar looping handwriting. I waited until sunset to open it, sitting on the bench in the courthouse garden, the same bench where I'd proposed 40 years ago. Nate. By the time you read this, I'll be in Maine. The cottage by the sea, remember? I thought I might finally write that novel we always joked about. You were right about everything, except one thing. I did love you, just not well enough. Be well. E. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. A seagull cried overhead, its shadow passing across the page. I folded the letter carefully and tucked it into my breast pocket, right over my heart. That night, I sat in my quiet apartment, the one I'd rented after the brownstone sold, and opened the bottle of scotch Boyle had sent me after his first Senate win. The amber liquid burned going down, but I drank it anyway. Toasts should be honored, even from enemies. The next morning, I returned to work. There were cases to hear, clerks to mentor, a system to mend, one careful ruling at a time. As I mounted the steps of the courthouse, a young public defender rushed up, her arms full of files. "Judge Kessler," she panted, "I know you're not assigned to our motion, but could you spare 5 minutes? No one else will listen." I checked my watch. Then I held open the heavy door. "Come on in," I said. "Let's hear what you've got." The marble halls echoed with our footsteps, her hesitant, mine steady. The past months had cost me everything I thought defined me: my marriage, my reputation, my carefully constructed identity. But here's what they couldn't take: the law, the truth, and the man I'd finally remembered I was. Could you forgive to move forward? Share your thoughts in the comments below.